Have you ever felt like money just slips through your fingers? That no matter how hard you try, there always seems to be something missing at the end of the month? Well, yes, Charlotte Morris knew this feeling well. An ordinary, hard-working woman, she carried an invisible burden, the fear of never being able to prosper. But what Charlotte didn't imagine was that the change she so desperately hoped for wouldn't come from outside, but from within. A simple click, a video she stumbled upon, and a new idea began to blossom in her mind. What if thoughts were magnets capable of attracting reality? Get ready, because the story you're about to hear is about how Charlotte transformed scarcity into abundance using the power of her mind and gratitude. A true story of new beginnings, faith, and discovery. The kind that makes us rethink everything we believe about destiny. Oh, and before we dive into this journey, tell me, are you subscribed to the channel yet? If not, subscribe, like, and comment below where in Brazil you're listening to this story from. Now, take a deep breath and come learn how Charlotte Morris awakened the invisible power that completely changed her life. Charlotte Morris was always a woman of simple habits, the kind who believed that hard work was the only path to success. She would wake up early, brave the traffic, and return home exhausted, feeling like the day had passed too quickly and life too slowly. Her small apartment had more bills on the table than dreams on the walls. Even so, she smiled, a tired but stubborn smile, the kind that hides more faith than hope. There was a kind of natural kindness about Charlotte, but also a constant fear of running out. Money never seemed enough, and when it did appear, it was already destined for rent, bills, medicine, postponed promises. She told herself that that's just how it is, that not everyone is born to have abundance. And this phrase, repeated so many times, ended up becoming an invisible truth, trapped in her thoughts that she no longer even noticed. Deep down, Charlotte believed that prosperity was a privilege reserved for the few. She saw people growing, traveling, achieving, and wondered, what do they have that I don't? This question echoed like an uncomfortable whisper every time she glanced at her bank statement or the empty balance in her wallet. And the more she tried to understand, the more it seemed like life revolved around a cycle of struggle and scarcity, a never-ending merry-go-round. Even with all this, Charlotte had a quiet glow. Sometimes, in the midst of her routine, she would daydream, imagining herself free, light, living in a way that seemed impossible. Dreams that came and went like the wind. But for some reason, lately, these dreams had been insistent on returning, as if something inside her was calling for change, even though she couldn't explain why. And it was in this mix of exhaustion and desire that life began to pave the way for something new. Something she didn't yet understand, but which was about to completely transform the way she saw the world and the very power she carried within herself. Charlotte's mornings began with the insistent sound of her alarm clock and the automatic thought, will I be able to pay everything this month? The coffee was simple, the bread was counted, and her gaze always skimmed over the bills on the table, like someone avoiding a familiar enemy. With each overdue bill, a tinge of guilt mingled with her routine, and that knot in her chest became a constant companion. It was as if life had become a game she could only lose. The days repeated themselves, and money seemed to slip through her fingers. Charlotte worked hard, but her pay never matched her efforts. There was always a new expense, an unexpected event, I'll see later message. Sometimes she wondered where she was going wrong, why the universe always seemed to give her less than she needed. It was a silent cycle. The more she tried to control, the more life showed her that control was an illusion. On weekends, when the house seemed even quieter, Charlotte would do the math in her notebook. She scribbled numbers, crossed out dreams. It wasn't laziness, nor disorganization. It was fear. Fear of never getting out of there. Fear of always living with a noose around her neck. There was something inside her that believed money was a villain, and she, a perpetual fugitive trying to escape debt. And this belief kept her trapped, even without chains. Sometimes looking out the window, she'd see cars passing by and wonder what it would be like to drive one without worrying about a full tank, or to buy a gift without having to pay in installments. Simple things, yet distant, like stars that admire each other but never touch. Deep down, she just wanted to breathe without feeling the weight of scarcity squeezing her chest. But life has a curious way of revealing itself. When everything seems too repetitive, it's a sign that something is about to change. And Charlotte, unbeknownst to her, was right in the middle of one of those cycles where the universe prepares a shift. Quiet, yet powerful. From a young age, Charlotte heard phrases that became part of her emotional vocabulary. Money doesn't grow on trees. We work to live, not to dream. These were words spoken by her parents, grandparents, neighbors, good people who loved her, but who also carried their own limitations. And Charlotte grew up believing them, like someone wearing an old garment that no longer fits, but is afraid to take it off. At school, she admired her classmates who talked about travel and plans, but she soon became convinced that this kind of life wasn't for her. I'm not lucky enough for these things, she thought. Her mind repeated what she'd heard for years, that money came with suffering, that life was made of effort and sacrifice. Each belief became an invisible wall, and she didn't even realize she was locked inside. These ideas didn't spring from thin air. They came from entire generations who learned to survive, not thrive. Charlotte understood this, but she didn't know how to break the cycle. It was as if scarcity had become an inheritance, passed from hand to hand, from heart to heart. A kind of silent loyalty to the past, difficult to abandon. Every now and then, Charlotte caught herself dreaming of the impossible. A better job, a bigger house, a life without fear. But soon an inner voice whispered, "Don't kid yourself, girl. This isn't for you." And she believed. The power of belief was so strong that it shaped her reality, even when she tried to change it. And so, between memories and repetitions, Charlotte continued without realizing that the barriers separating her from abundance were not in the world, they were within her. But fate, patient and curious, was already preparing the moment when this realization would change everything. It was a rainy afternoon when everything seemed to fall apart. Charlotte received the news that the company where she had worked for almost 6 years was laying off staff, and her name was on the list. The world spun for a moment, and the sound of the rain hitting the window seemed to mock her anguish. The badge she carried every day, a symbol of the stability she believed she had, was now just a useless piece of plastic in her trembling hands. That night, the silence in the house felt heavier than ever. Charlotte sat on the couch and looked around. The same worn sofa, the same walls, the same bills on the table. Everything was the same. But something inside her was different. It was as if the ground had cracked, and she was facing an abyss she didn't know how to cross. For the first time, fear and exhaustion met within her, and together they formed a question. What if there is another way? The following days were a blur. She tried sending out resumes, making calls, seeking help, but nothing happened. Life seemed to be on hold, and in the midst of this emptiness, something curious began to emerge. A space. A gap between despair and the unknown, as if the universe had taken everything away so she could finally look at herself. It was painful, but also strange. There was a distinct, almost imperceptible calm. Charlotte began walking in the mornings, trying to organize her thoughts. At first, it was just to distract her mind. But gradually, she realized that these walks were opening up clearings within her, places of silence she had never visited. And it was during one of these moments that a new idea began to form, still timid, like a thread of light breaking through the darkness. Perhaps, she thought, what seemed like the end was actually the beginning of something greater. An invitation to see life through different eyes. But what eyes would those be? The answer, she didn't yet know. She just felt something was about to change, and this time it wouldn't just be work. One morning, while aimlessly browsing the internet, Charlotte stumbled upon a video that seemed to have appeared by chance. The title read, "You attract whatever you believe." She almost passed it by, but something in those words stuck with her like a forgotten melody. It clicked. The narrator's calm voice spoke of energy, thoughts, and the power to create one's own reality. At first, Charlotte chuckled to herself. Oh, if only it were that easy. But she couldn't stop listening. The words echoed in her mind for hours. You create what you focus on. The universe responds to your vibration. They sounded strange, almost mystical, but they sparked something inside her, a kind of curiosity that mixed skepticism and hope. In the days that followed, Charlotte returned to the channel, read comments, and searched for books. It was as if a new language began to make sense, even without translation, until, in a bookstore, she found an old copy of a book about the law of attraction. The title seemed to glow in the late afternoon light. Charlotte leafed through the pages and felt a shiver. The stories seemed to speak to her, ordinary people who had transformed their lives by changing their thinking. Something in her heart stirred, as if recognizing the truth that had always been there, waiting to be remembered. That night, Charlotte read late into the night. Each page was both a mirror and a map. For the first time, she considered the possibility that perhaps it wasn't the world that was against her. Perhaps it was her own thoughts. The idea left her restless, but also alive, awake, with a sparkle in her eyes she hadn't felt in a long time. In the silence of the room, she closed the book and took a deep breath. What if this is real? She whispered to herself. The question hung in the air, sweet and provocative, opening a new space within her. The space where the impossible slowly began to become possible. In the early days, Charlotte laughed at herself as she tried to apply what she'd read. Will positive thinking pay my bills now? She muttered, half irony, half curious. It was a mix of disbelief and need. After all, what did she have to lose? Between job searches, she began repeating phrases that sounded strange in her own mouth. I deserve to prosper. Money flows easily to me. And even though she didn't fully believe it, there was something comforting in saying it. Mornings began to have a new ritual. Before opening her laptop, Charlotte would take a deep breath and try to feel gratitude, even without knowing why. At first, it felt like theater. But curiously, on the days she did this, she noticed small, good things happening. An unexpected email, a compliment, a light feeling. She didn't call it a manifestation yet, but she was beginning to notice the effect of shifting her focus. Even so, the ancient mind wouldn't be silenced easily. This is a coincidence, the logical side said, trying to pull her back to familiar ground. It was a silent duel between the old and the new, between fear and faith. Charlotte swayed like someone learning to walk again, stumbling, doubting, but moving on. Sometimes, when she lay in bed at night, she felt ashamed of her own thoughts. Am I becoming silly? She wondered. But soon a different feeling would come over her, a quiet peace, as if something greater were saying, keep going. And so she continued. She repeated the phrases, tried to feel gratitude, read another chapter, and so, little by little, she began to realize that the simple act of trying changed everything. Charlotte didn't yet know what she was getting into, but something inside her already did. The doubt was strong, yes, but there was something stronger growing alongside it. A silent spark ready to burst into flame. One day, while rereading a passage from the book, Charlotte came across a simple exercise: to write down, every day, 3 things she was grateful for. She wrinkled her nose. It sounded like something out of a motivational magazine, but still. She grabbed an old notebook, the kind forgotten in the back of a drawer, and began. I'm grateful for the roof over my head, for the hot coffee, for the sunshine that streamed through the window today. Simple, even obvious, but somehow it made her smile. In the early days, writing was almost a challenge. Sometimes she stared at the blank page, unsure of what to be grateful for. It felt like the whole world was conspiring against her, and gratitude seemed like a dull joke. But she persisted, and over time, she began to notice details that had previously gone unnoticed. The smell of coffee, the laughter of a child in the street, the comfort of silence. Small things, but full of life. The notebook began to gain color. Her letters, previously hurried, became smoother. And the curious thing was that the more she wrote, the more situations for gratitude arose. It was as if the act of giving thanks opened a crack in the chaos and let light in. Charlotte began to feel something new, a kind of lightness that depended on nothing external, only herself. One morning, she caught herself laughing to herself. "Look, I'm even thankful for the bill paid with every last penny." It was strange, but liberating. Gratitude, she realized, didn't change circumstances immediately, but it changed how she saw them, and that made all the difference. It was like changing the lens of life and seeing the same scenario, but with new colors. And it was in this lighter vibration that something began to move around her. Small coincidences, unexpected encounters, subtle opportunities. Charlotte didn't know it yet, but the simple habit of giving thanks was reprogramming something much deeper, the way she connected with the universe. As the days passed, Charlotte began to notice something curious. Everything she thought, somehow, was reflected in her life. When she woke up complaining, the day seemed heavy, slow, full of surprises. But when she woke with a slight intention of gratitude, things flowed better. The bus arrived faster. The service at the bank was friendlier. Even the weather seemed to cooperate. It was as if the world were a mirror, returning exactly what she sent out. This realization intrigued her. She began to pay closer attention to what she said, what she felt, and even what she repeated in her mind without realizing it. And she realized she was constantly saying things like, "Nothing works out for me," or "I never have enough money." It was like casting spells without realizing it. And of course, the universe, ever obedient, confirmed every word she spoke with conviction. Charlotte decided to try the opposite. Instead of complaining, she began affirming what she wanted to experience. "Things are working out for me. Money comes in unexpected ways." At first, it seemed like a lie, but somehow, these new phrases made her body relax and her mind believe just a little bit more. And that little bit was enough to change the tone of her day. Over time, she began to realize that her thoughts had flavor, color, and texture. That some were bitter and heavy, while others were light and sweet. And that the more she chose to think beautifully, the more beautifully life seemed to respond. It was almost magical, and at the same time, too simple to be coincidence. It was then that a new understanding began to dawn. If thoughts create reality, then she had the power to choose what to sow. And in realizing this, Charlotte understood that the real work was not outside, but inside. A mental garden waiting to bloom. One quiet afternoon, inspired by a video about visualization, Charlotte decided to create her own dream board. She spread magazines, scissors, and glue on the table, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like a child playing at imagination. She cut out images of bright houses, landscapes that invited freedom, and smiling people, not perfect models, but expressions of genuine joy. Each cutout was a seed of a possible future. As she assembled the panel, she realized something curious. It wasn't just about wishing for things, but about allowing herself to feel them. When she looked at those images, Charlotte tried to imagine the smell, the sound, the emotion of already experiencing them. And the more she immersed herself in that sensation, the more real everything seemed. The simple act of visualizing became a sensory experience, almost like time travel, only within herself. With the painting finished, she hung it on the wall opposite her bed. It was the first face she saw when she woke, and the last before she fell asleep. It wasn't just a jumble of figures. It was a silent reminder of who she could be. And every time her eyes met those images, a new feeling emerged. Hope, enthusiasm, faith. It was as if the universe were whispering, "See, it's yours. Just keep believing. In the days that followed, she began to act differently. She was no longer the Charlotte who simply waited for destiny to happen. She was the Charlotte who chose to think, feel, and live as if her dreams were already arriving. And, curiously, the world began to respond. Invitations, ideas, new people, little synchronicities danced around her. And as she pasted in another image of a trip to the seaside, Charlotte realized she wasn't just creating a painting. She was drawing a map of her new reality. And the most beautiful thing of all was knowing that, this time, she was the one holding the reins of her own story. Every day, before getting out of bed, Charlotte began a new ritual. With her eyes still closed, she would repeat softly, "I am worthy of all that is good. Prosperity finds me easily. Money comes to me in unexpected ways." At first, her voice sounded shy, shaky, almost forced. It seemed strange to say such beautiful things when her bank balance still said otherwise. But she kept going, like someone learning a new language, and persisted until the sound made sense. The first few days were filled with resistance. A part of her scoffed, saying it was a waste of time. Another, quieter part felt something shift. Those words, once mechanical, began to gain weight, form, and energy. Charlotte noticed small differences: a lighter body, a better mood, a desire to dress up a little more. It was as if with each affirmation, she was reminded of something forgotten: her own worth. One day, looking in the mirror, she saw herself differently, not as the woman worried about bills, but as someone full of potential. And for a moment, she truly believed. That spark was enough to rekindle a flame that fear had extinguished years ago. It was the beginning of her self-esteem blossoming again, timid but alive. Over time, the words stopped being repetitions and became truths. I deserve it. I can. I am. Simple yet powerful phrases that began to shape her energy and, little by little, her reality. Each morning, Charlotte didn't just speak, she felt them, and that feeling began to transform everything. The mirror became her ally, the words her cure. She couldn't yet see the great results outward, but she could already feel them within. And this new vibration, this confidence born from nowhere, would be the fuel for the next turning point, the one the universe was already preparing. It was sudden, almost subtle, an email she hadn't expected, a phone call from an old colleague offering a temporary job, an invitation for coffee that turned into a new friendship. Things began to move around Charlotte in a different way, as if the universe had woken up along with her. And the strangest thing is that none of it felt like a coincidence. It was as if life was saying with a smile on its face, "See? I heard you." With each small event, Charlotte felt her heart flutter in a new way. It wasn't euphoria, it was certainty. The certainty that something bigger was happening. She began to revel in the signs, a song playing at just the right time, a random phrase that answered a thought, even a book falling off the shelf right on the page she needed to read. The world, once cold and distant, now seemed to speak to her. These signs were small but powerful. They made Charlotte feel she was on the right path, even without fully understanding her destination. The fear that had previously guided her gave way to a gentle, almost innocent confidence. She began to walk more lightly, unhurriedly, as if knowing things were falling into place behind the scenes. One afternoon, as she left her house, she found a bill on the ground. It was small, but she smiled, not because of its value, but because of the symbol. Money is flowing to me, she thought, remembering the affirmations she repeated every morning. And in that moment, she felt as if the universe was truly enjoying its own synchronicity. Charlotte began collecting these moments, like someone storing proof of a miracle in the making. Small pieces of evidence that the invisible was working in her favor. And each sign, each coincidence, was a silent reminder. The impossible was beginning to become natural. It seemed like everything was finally falling into place, until suddenly the wind changed. A major client backed out of the project at the last minute, and the payment Charlotte was counting on to cover the bills simply didn't come. Her heart sank. For a few seconds, the old thought came rushing back. I knew it. Nothing lasts forever. It was as if the universe was testing the strength of her newly built faith, just to see if she truly believed what she was saying. The following days were a true exercise in patience. Charlotte tried to remain calm, but her mind insisted on pulling her back to fear. At night, as she lay in bed, she stared at the ceiling and asked, "What now? Was all this effort for nothing?" But something inside her, a new, gentle voice said, "Don't go back to the old energy. Trust." It was difficult. Doubt is loud, and faith is silent. Still, she chose to listen to the whisper. She returned to her gratitude notebook. Even reluctantly, she wrote with tears in her eyes, giving thanks for what she didn't yet have. It was one of the most powerful gestures of her journey. It was as if she were saying to the universe, "I trust, even without proof." And this surrender, so pure, began to change the air around her. A new, serene energy began to fill the space previously occupied by fear. A few days later, an unexpected call came. A former client wanted to recommend Charlotte for an even bigger job, with payment up front. Her heart sank. It was as if the universe was saying, "See, I just wanted to know if you truly trusted me." And for the first time, she understood that the law of attraction wasn't just about positive thinking. It was about maintaining a positive vibe even when everything seemed to be going wrong. And there, holding the phone with trembling hands, Charlotte smiled. Faith, she realized, isn't believing when everything works out. It's continuing to believe when nothing makes sense. And it was this faith that opened the doors to the next miracle, already silently approaching. After that episode, something profoundly changed within Charlotte. She began to look at money in a completely new way. She no longer saw it as a difficult enemy to conquer, but as a living energy that circulated, flowed, and responded to what she felt. She realized that for a long time, she had vibrated with fear and lack, and that was exactly what she attracted. Now, she was beginning to learn that when you feel abundant, abundance finds its way back to you. One afternoon, sitting on the couch with her notebook in her lap, she wrote, "Money is just energy. I am a channel for it to flow." Rereading it, she felt a chill. For the first time, those words didn't sound like theory. They rang true. Charlotte began to realize that when she spoke lovingly about prosperity, when she felt grateful even without reason, life responded gently, almost poetically. She began treating money with respect, not fear. She paid her bills with a silent thank you, like someone sending out positive energy and hoping it returns in abundance. And curiously, she began to notice this happening. An unexpected refund, a discount that appeared out of nowhere, a gift that arrived for no reason. Small gestures from the universe saying, "Keep on this path." More than that, Charlotte realized that scarcity was never in the bank account. It was always in the mind. It was a way of thinking, a learned pattern, a filter that distorted reality. And as she exchanged fear for trust, resentment for gratitude, the flow of life opened up like a river, finally finding its natural course. She couldn't explain scientifically what was happening, and she didn't need to. What mattered was feeling, and she felt it. The energy of abundance was beginning to dance with hers, in such a light, beautiful harmony that it would completely transform what was to come. The change began from the inside out, almost imperceptibly. Charlotte woke up different, calmer, more whole. She no longer started the day with worries, but with a light sigh of confidence. It was as if the world was still the same, but she had changed the way she saw it. The little things that once irritated her now seemed part of the game of life, and this new lightness was the clearest sign that something profound was happening. She noticed that her decisions began to come from a calmer place. Instead of reacting out of fear, she began acting on intuition. When something didn't make sense, she took a deep breath and waited for the right impulse. And curiously, the right path appeared. sometimes in the form of an idea, other times as a new person crossing her path. It was as if life and she were finally speaking the same language. Charlotte began saying yes to opportunities more and no to what drained her energy. She stopped beating herself up for resting, for wanting more, for dreaming big. She understood that thriving wasn't about deserving, it was about allowing. And allowing required lightness. Little by little, she realized that the fear, once so present, had lost its power. In its place grew a serene, beautiful, and steadfast faith. Her friends noticed the difference. "You look more radiant," they said, and she smiled, unable to explain. How can one put into words what happens when the soul aligns with its own essence? There was a quiet glow about her, born of the peace of someone who understood that control was never the way to go. Trust was. And it was in this state of inner harmony that the universe, like a generous mirror, began to reflect back what she had become. Because when change happens within, the world outside has no choice but to follow suit. It was on an ordinary morning, one of those when the sun seems to rise with a different glow, that everything began to change. Charlotte was drinking coffee when she received a message from an old acquaintance. A company was looking for someone with exactly her skills to lead a new project. Her heart raced. She took a deep breath before responding, remembering the time she would have doubted herself, but now was different. There was confidence in the air, and she said yes without hesitation. The interview took place days later, and Charlotte entered the room with a calm smile. She was no longer the woman who shrank from opportunities. She spoke confidently, with a sparkle in her eyes, and, above all, with truth. The conversation flowed as if the entire universe were conspiring in her favor. When she left, she already knew something great was about to happen. And it did. She was hired for a position that paid 3 times more than her previous one. The first payment arrived like divine confirmation. Charlotte held the receipt in her hands and smiled, not at the number, but at what it represented. Proof that her energy had shifted and the world had simply responded. It was the materialization of what had previously existed only in her imagination, an affirmation spoken in a trembling voice, on nights when she chose to trust, even in the midst of fear. She allowed herself to celebrate. She bought flowers, prepared a simple dinner, lit candles, and gave thanks, not to chance, but to the invisible force that had always been there, just waiting for her to believe. And that night, she went to bed with a new feeling, the certainty that prosperity wasn't luck, it was harmony. Charlotte slept with a light heart, knowing this was just the beginning. Because when the mind aligns with abundance, life takes care of multiplying miracles. With her new financial phase blossoming, Charlotte could have relaxed, left her old habits behind. But she knew, what brought her here wasn't luck, it was energy. So every day, even with a busy schedule, she maintained her rituals. In the morning, coffee was still accompanied by gratitude, now with more reasons, it's true, but with the same pure intention. And before bed, she closed her eyes and visualized the future with the same clarity with which an artist sees a painting before painting it. The dream board remained on the wall, but now it was almost a portrait of reality. Even so, Charlotte kept it there, not as a goal, but as a reminder. A reminder that everything begins within. The visualizations ceased to be wishes and became silent conversations with the universe. Each mental image was a thank you in advance for the blessings still on their way. On her busiest days, she found simple moments to reconnect. A silent walk, a long bath, a song that made her feel deeply grateful. It was in those moments that she realized, abundance doesn't reside in what you have, but in what you feel. And she felt a lot. She felt love, trust, lightness, vibrations that attracted even more of the same. Charlotte began to notice that the more she gave thanks, the more life gave her reasons to be grateful. The universe seemed to respond in an almost musical rhythm. Gratitude, response. Gratitude, response. It was a continuous dance between her and existence. And the more she surrendered to this flow, the more things slowed naturally. And it was like this, in this silent constancy, that Charlotte discovered the true power of practice. It's not how much you do, but how much you feel. And she felt so much that the universe, once again, was preparing to surprise her in an even greater way. One morning, while getting ready for work, Charlotte looked in the mirror and noticed something different. The reflection was the same face, the same eyes, but there was something new there, a serene peace, a soft glow, a confidence that didn't depend on anything external. It was in that moment that she understood. Everything that had changed on the outside had started within. The money, the success, the opportunities were simply consequences of a mind and heart aligned with something greater. She remembered the nights she cried, doubting everything, and smiled. It was just the beginning, she thought. Now, she looked back and saw each difficulty as part of a preparation, as if the universe had taught her lesson after lesson until she was ready to blossom. And the most beautiful thing was realizing that it wasn't just her financial life that had changed. It was the way she lived, felt, and saw herself. Charlotte began walking the streets with a different rhythm. Everything seemed more alive. The people, the colors, even the air. She had become more present, more grateful, more aware of every detail. The prosperity she felt wasn't just in the bank, but in her heart, and this inner abundance overflowed in every gesture, every word, every look. One day, during a conversation with a friend, she heard herself say, "I thought I needed to have to be happy." But it was the opposite. I needed to be happy to have. The sentence came naturally, as if she had always known, but only now truly understood. It was at that moment that she saw. The greatest miracle wasn't the money that arrived, but the woman she had become. And with a light heart, Charlotte realized that the journey wasn't over yet. Because when the mind awakens and the heart expands, the universe always finds new ways to show how far abundance can go. The following months were a time of harvest. Everything began to flow so naturally that Charlotte almost didn't realize how much her life had changed. Her bills were paid, her name was clear, and what had previously been a struggle became a tranquility. She learned to organize her finances without fear, to invest wisely, and most importantly, to trust the flow of life. The money that had previously fled now seemed happy to stay and even bring company. Each new opportunity seemed to spring from positive energy planted long ago. One client referred another, and projects grew like well-tended trees. Charlotte was amazed at how easily things happened. It wasn't luck, she knew, it was vibration. It was the reflection of a heart aligned with what it believed, and a mind that learned to think in abundance, not lack. The most beautiful thing was that prosperity came with peace. There was no longer that rush, that fear of loss. She understood that money was a guest that only lingered where there was harmony. And so she cared for her energy with the same care she cared for her finances. She made gratitude her daily prayer and joy her safest investment. One day, while looking at her bank statement, Charlotte was moved, not by the numbers, but by the memory of how much she believed when everything told her to give up. It was like witnessing a bountiful harvest after years of watering the soil of faith. And inside her, a sweet voice whispered, "See, everything you believed has come true." And so, with a light heart and a peaceful mind, she understood that prosperity is not a destination, it's a state of being. And the longer she lived in this state, the more the universe insisted on surprising her. Over time, people began to notice that Charlotte was no longer the same, not just because of her success, but because of the energy she emanated. It was impossible to be around her without feeling a glimmer of hope. Colleagues, friends, even strangers wanted to know what had changed. And she, with a calm smile, talked about the power of changing one's thoughts, the power of gratitude, and how the universe responds to those who learn to vibrate with love. Charlotte never saw herself as a master, only as someone who discovered something precious and wanted to share it. She created small community gatherings, recorded simple videos online, and began telling her story. She spoke from the heart, without formulas, without promises. And people listened, not because she taught, but because she was living proof that it was possible. The sparkle in her eyes said more than any words. With each story she received, Charlotte was moved. People who began practicing gratitude, visualizing, believing, and who were reaping the results. It was like watching a current of light spread throughout the world, one spark igniting another. She understood then that true prosperity wasn't just about having, but about making others believe they could have it too. One night, while reading messages of gratitude, Charlotte wept with joy. If I had given up back then, none of this would exist, she thought. And she felt deeply that every tear, every doubt, every step of her journey served to help others find their own path. It was the cycle of abundance in its purest form, giving and receiving in perfect harmony. And it was like this, inspiring and being inspired, that Charlotte realized the power of the mind is contagious. And when one person awakens, the whole world begins to awaken with them. Today, when Charlotte walks the same streets where she once carried worry, everything seems different. The facades, the sky, even the wind, everything seems lighter, as if the whole world had changed along with her. But deep down, she knows, what changed was her perspective. The universe remained the same, but now she saw it through the eyes of abundance, with a heart open to receive and, above all, to believe. Sometimes she finds herself remembering the old Charlotte, the one who doubted, the one who feared, the one who thought prosperity was a privilege for the few. And she smiles. Because she understands that the journey was never about money, it was about awakening, about realizing that the mind is a fertile field and that each thought is a seed. When we water it with faith, gratitude, and love, the garden inevitably blossoms, inside and out. Charlotte learned that life responds to vibration, not words, that wishing is important, but feeling is essential, and that the universe, generously, always finds a way to deliver what matches the frequency we emanate. The secret, she realized, was never outside. It was always inside, waiting for the right moment to be remembered. Today, she lives with purpose, abundance, and peace. Not because everything is perfect, but because she now knows how to dance to the music of life, and every note, every pause, every silence has meaning. Charlotte has become living proof that when the mind changes, everything changes, and that is the invisible beauty of the law of attraction, transforming the impossible into the inevitable. And so, her story continues to echo, like a gentle invitation to anyone listening. If Charlotte could do it, you can too. Just believe, vibrate, and let the universe do the rest. Charlotte's journey reminds us that life changes when we change from within. She didn't find a secret hidden in expensive books, nor did she need luck. What transformed everything was something simple, yet powerful. Believing that the universe responds to the frequency we choose to emit. The former Charlotte, who lived in fear of lack, discovered that the true treasure is not money itself, but the feeling of abundance that arises from gratitude. And it is this feeling that attracts all that is good, all that matches our new vibration. Today, she lives lightly, at peace with the past, and certain that the mind is the greatest creative tool there is. And if you've made it this far, perhaps the universe is also trying to remind you of this, that you are capable of transforming any reality. You just need to start vibrating at the frequency of faith, joy, and gratitude. So, if this story inspired you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like it, and turn on notifications to keep receiving stories like this. Because, who knows, the next transformation story we tell could be yours.